Freeman Tilden's fifth principle, as I'm reading it here, says this: interpretation should aim to present a whole rather than a part, and it must address itself to the whole. Well, I'm standing in front of a 4-bay barn wall here, and to give you an example of what Tilden meant, I have in my hands a rock, and by itself it has value. I could go into how this rock was made. I could talk about its purpose in the geological whole, but let's give it a visual. Now, as you look at this wall of this 4-bay barn, you will notice that there are some rather large stones here. Yes, they seem to have the main reason for being. But let me point to this stone right here. Aha! It's about the size of the stone I have in my hand. Now, when placed in the wall, it not only has significant meaning for itself, it now takes on the whole. Are you getting it? The wall now speaks because of that rock and other rocks. And thus now we can take this to a historical whole, which is, why did they build barns the way this one has been built? It has a purpose. It's orientated towards the sun. And so in the winter, the sun's angles are high or low in the sky, and they heat the barn, these rocks. But in the summer, the angle of the sun is blocked by the 4-bay of the barn, and thus it's cool on these stones. That's an example of principle of the whole. And yes, Tilden was very, very descriptive in what he wanted us to learn. Now let me add another thing to the story of the whole. We have people who call themselves historians and those that are cultural geographers. Well, I used to be part 1 and part 2. What does a historian look for? A historian asks when, why, and what. Now here's the cultural geographer. Asks where, why, and what. And that human geographer doesn't strictly concentrate on landforms as the end product. The geographer perceives each place as the product of change through time. Once we comprehend the value of the whole, this is what Freeman Tilden said will result. He says that through interpretation, we get understanding. We understand why this wall is here and why these stones are so beautifully placed and they are solid. Through understanding, now we gain an appreciation. This has historical and cultural value. And here comes the one that we often forget, but it's so important. Now, because we have an appreciation, now what do we want to do? We don't want to tear this barn down. We want to protect this barn and share it with generations to come. That's the whole. I challenge you to make that come alive in your presentations. Now, this barn that we are using today was constructed here in 1868. But before it was constructed, this land was owned by not necessarily Pennsylvania Germans who owned the barn in 1868. This land was whose land? That's a good question. And it is believed that in this area there were native indigenous nations that owned this land. And we can mention one of them, the Lenni Lenape, also known as the Delaware. Well, they were not the only nation that wanted to use this land. For on this land, there were found beaver. And when the beaver hat style became popular over in Europe, guess what? The natives wanted to get the beaver and make money off of the beaver. Well, this led to a thing called the Beaver Wars. And who was fighting who? One large group of native indigenous people called the Algonquin, and the other large group of indigenous people called the Iroquois. 6 nations came together as one. Well, they battled back and forth. But who's coming into America about that time? Well, we have the Swedes, we have the French Huguenots, we have the Welsh, the English, the Palatinate Germans, of which this man, Mr. Hostler, was. And now, all of a sudden, William Penn gets a land grant, but by 1752, his land grant, which was established in 1681, this is not necessarily just Penn's land, this is Berks County. And now the Germans will rule this area, but their government will be of English pattern. That's connecting to the whole.